At the top of this bulletin, we brought you a report that polls have opened in Zimbabwe in an election which has a lot riding on it, especially for the opposition parties who are looking to end a 43-year monopoly of power by the ruling ZANU-PF party. Incumbent President Emmerson Mnangagwa says another 5-year term in office, but the mood of the citizens who are going through soaring inflation and high unemployment may prove critical for the outcome. And political analyst, Southern African Times' Farai Muvuti joins us now to focus a bit more on the candidates, their manifestos and chances in the election. Good to have you here on Newsday, Farai. All right, good. Now, so we know voting is underway. So 11 candidates, including one woman vying for the president's job. Walk us through the chances for some of the leading candidates and, of course, their manifestos.
Great. Yet again, thank you for having me. So currently, the Zimbabwean situation is proving to be quite relatively peaceful. There have been no disturbances in as far as build up to the elections. Historically, as you know, the elections have been disputed. But I think the particular government in question, which is, of course, led by the incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa, have done a lot of work to ensure that, they invite international observers to create a particular environment in terms of pursuant to the agenda of peace, and equally wanting the Zimbabwean community to go back into a global village in terms of the through their, of course, their thrust, which is their foreign policy thrust, a re-engagement and engagement policy. What we've noticed and witnessed so far is that based on the number of, we have about 11 candidates, two more prominent, which is one led by Nelson Chamisa, who is the leader of the Citizens Coalition group, which is CCC, and we have ZANU-PF led by the incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa. ZANU-PF itself, which is a ruling party, have not actually produced a manifesto this year. Their argument is that it is underpinned by what they call their three plans, their three projects, which began in the post-election phase of 2018, which started, of course, with what they called their transitional strategic program, which was a short-term program to ensure that they brought the fundamental issues that they were dealing with. Of course, the opposition party has released its manifesto, which is undergirded by a number of principles, which we can delve into in greater detail.
All right, then. Thank you so much for setting the tone of this conversation. However, monitoring groups have raised issues about alleged anomalies on the voters' roll, saying some names have been removed from their usual place of voting to other areas. There's also been criticism about the last-minute boundary changes, meaning voters may not know their assigned polling stations have changed. How might these issues impact the integrity and the fairness of the election process? And also, in the face of some of these disruptions and, even the bans on opposition rallies, how would you characterize the pre-election environment and state of the nation as it currently is?
So, of course, during an election period, there are going to be a number of observers, some that are official and some that are non-official. In terms of the official observers, they have no outcomes as yet, because the process of observing any election, of course, from a preliminary standpoint, is to literally gather insight. So a number of the EU delegation that has come here have not actually released a report, nor has it been the case of SADC, which arrived last week. So I doubt that any formidable observer group that actually is assigned to operate in Zimbabwe right now has any outcome in terms of a preliminary thought around the elections. Now, to talk about the delimitation, that's a separate issue altogether, because delimitation in the country's constitution occurs every 10-year cycle. And which is the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission, which is a Chapter 9 institution, which by virtue of their constitutional mandate are meant to issue these at a period, at a very logical period before the elections. Thus far, they did this about 6 to 8 months prior the election. And a number of consultations occurred. There were court rulings and a number of court challenges, of which so far the courts have ruled in favor of the ZEC, saying that it is their mandatory constitutional right to introduce these limitations, and the particular necessary parties in question would have been given the reports and would be given sufficient time to prepare and to further evidence this. If you recall, before this election, the two parties in question had to go to what they call their own primary elections. And ZANU-PF took up its primary elections in accordance to the particular delimitations that were being facilitated for. They did it much more earlier, even after they'd done it. Other parties within the political landscape took the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission to court, arguing that the delimitation was not in a timely fashion. The argument was not be it that is it credible. They were talking about the timing. That particular case was ruled in favor of the ZEC, which subsequent to that, the current opposition party, CCC, then went through what they call not a primary election, but they called it a selection process, a champion selection process, in which they picked their candidates that they'll be putting through for this election. All those processes allowed all political players to make sense of their delimitations and equally make their supporters acquainted with these particular new boundaries. I think this was done. So in as far as the observer report is concerned, I do not think it should be taken seriously, because I think a number of, including the EU, as is the case with the AU led by Goodluck Jonathan, and as you're aware, we have people from the Commission from which is part of the UK, for instance. All these reports are not yet facilitated to the point in which we can actually hold it substantively. And as far as the delimitation report, it's been a constitutional requirement in Zimbabwe, and I think that process is what they followed. So that would be the argument. Of course, the criticism should be taken on board and should be looked into seriously.
Indeed, Farai. And very briefly now, if you may, just 1 minute. In 2018, there were 4 female presidential candidates. And of course, Elizabeth Valerio is the only one vying for the top job today. Why is that? And what has happened between now and then? Briefly, please.
I think there's criticism to go towards all sides of the political terrain. And as far as women representation, not a lot was done. I think what the government tried to introduce, of course, through the constitution, is to introduce a women's quota, which enables greater participation in as far as positive discrimination to enable people that were disenfranchised to equally have access, which included the youth. But women were fundamental in this particular regard. In light to the presidential echelon, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in as far as women participation and as far as engagement is concerned. The contradiction, of course, is always going to be the dichotomy between, being a lady, but equally following democratic practice in terms of finding a majoritarian sense. So there's a cultural norm that definitely needs to adjust.
Thank you so much, Farai Muvuti, senior analyst at the Southern African Times. Thank you for being here on Newsday.